by which the Hasidic teaching stands. And when I say the Hasidic teaching, I'm referring to all the Hasidic world. In fact, every Hasidic movement, including those who oppose Chabad, do study Tanya. There is nothing similar, there is no comparison, and as time goes by, it becomes more important to, so to say, answer or accommodate for the need that is growing, where people keep asking questions where in the past they didn't even bother about. So before I start, I want to share a little bit about the author of the Tanya. He was a prodigy as a child. When he was born, let's start earlier than that. The master that introduced the Hasidic teaching was the Baal Shem Tov. The Rabbi Israel, Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov means the man who owns good name, or the person with a good name, because he earned a good name. When the Baal Shem Tov came into the world and spread his teaching, there was a great opposition, because at the same time, there were other men who said that they were Messiah, false messiahs. There was one called the Shabtai Tzvi, very well known, that was able to convince entire communities and rabbis to follow him. Later on, he converted to Islam. There was the Frankism, that were a movement that followed the man to believe that he's Messiah, and it created major chaos. Lots of families, lots of communities suffered great losses. When the Baal Shem Tov arrives in the world, there were many, many leaders who feared that the Baal Shem Tov is another one of those, so to say, charlatans, who is looking to become famous and earn money, etc. In addition, the Baal Shem Tov main introduction to Judaism was that all Jewish people are equal before God. It don't matter if you're a scholar or a simple man. And the way to connect to God is through joy. And to enjoy our relationship and to appreciate it via joy is the way to connect to God. And it might get us closer to God, perhaps, than other ways. The scholars didn't like it, because until that time, there were a total segregation between the scholars and the simple men, where the scholars had their own synagogue. That's why if you go back to Poland today, if you find ancient synagogues, you would find the tailor's synagogue, the shoemaker's synagogue, and they have the scholar's synagogue. So if you're a tailor, you're not allowed to enter the scholars. So what it created is an elite group of men who study Torah, wouldn't share or socialize with the rest of the community, and the rest of the community was left alone to suffer. They felt second-class citizens, so to say. Nobody cared about them, and thus over time they were, so to say, pushed away farther and farther. The Baal Shem Tov came and said, if a man says thank God, or with God's help, and when a man celebrates a holiday or Shabbat, they can come closer to God, and therefore we all have the same equal opportunity. So the scholars resisted it because they were about to lose their power. They created all kinds of excommunication against the Hasidim, and they tried to fight the Baal Shem Tov, despite all the evidence that the Baal Shem Tov did not step out of boundary and did not go against Torah. But there were many people who had reasons to, so to say, push the Hasidim away. The Baal Shem Tov died, and the next leader was Rabbi Dov Ber of Mesrich, of a town in Poland called Mesrich. He was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe. We call him the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Here is a summary about the Alter Rebbe. The reason I shared with you about the Baal Shem Tov a little bit is when the Alter Rebbe was 3 years old, his father took him to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov blessed him and told his father that this is a new soul that for hundreds of years there have not been new souls, and he would light up the universe, the world, in both ways, the revealed Torah and the secret part of Torah. As I will show soon, in both ways, he succeeded beyond imagination, and the secret part of Torah that he illuminated the universe is with the Tanya. The revealed part is the code of law, which he composed. So on both sections, on both parts, he had introduced a new teaching, a new way of communication with God. The Alter Rebbe was born in the year 1745. He was called Zalman Borochovich. Borochovich meaning the son of Baruch. His mother's name was Baruch, and that's how they use Vich, means son of. Borochovich, that was his last name. At the age, he was a prodigy child in math. He was able to solve many, many complex difficulties that the greatest professors couldn't solve. And he got married at a very young age of, I believe, 14. At the age of 15, he moved to the area of Vitebsk, and he got married to his wife Sterna Segal. She was the daughter of a very well-respected businessman, very successful, that lived in Vitebsk. At around the age of 20, he discovered the Hasidic movement. He was from Lithuania. The Hasidim was in the region of Podolia. Podolia is the southeast of Poland, and they were a little far from each other. But he discovered, because he was looking for a master to teach him Torah. And there were two centers. One center, the Mesrich Maggid, was teaching, and another center in Vilna, in Lithuania. And he decided that to study Torah, he already gained enough. But to study how to pray to God, he didn't know. And the Mesrich, Maggid of Mesrich, was known to be concentrating on teaching how to study, how to pray to God. So he decided to take a chance, and he immediately connected. He was among the very young students. He was actually the youngest of 60 students. However, the Maggid of Mesrich trusted them in such great way that he appointed them to codify Jewish law, to take the Jewish law that was written 250 years earlier by a famous Kabbalist in Tzfat, and make it known, and with all the reasons, to explain the reasons behind. And we know it today to be the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, the code of law that was composed by the Rav. All the Mishnah Brura, the modern day code of law, is based on Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Later on, he composed many other books. During the years 1772 and 1773 were the 2 years that he was studying in Mesrich with the Maggid of Mesrich. And aside appointing him, as even though he was the youngest, to write the code of law, the Maggid of Mesrich saw his ability. He also appointed him to study with his own son, Rebbe Avraham. Avraham was his name. He had many, many dynasties that came out of that son. But that son was a very special man, and his father appointed the Alter Rebbe to be his chavruta, his body to study Torah. Later on, as we will read in the introduction to Tanya, where he writes that he has composed teaching he received from many teachers, he refers to the Mesrich Maggid and to his son, Rebbe Avraham, whom he became a chavruta and he studied on a daily basis. In the year 1772, there was a major war erupted in the Jewish community, where many non-Hasidim opposed the Hasidic movement, and they came out with a major excommunication announcements, where no one is allowed to sit near the Hasidim, no one is allowed to account them for minyan, no one is allowed to do business with them. What made the 1772 a very powerful excommunication is the major Torah scholar, the Gaon of Vilna, also signed on the letter. and he was the figure, the final authority in the Jewish world. The Mesrich Maggid decided to try and calm down this war by sending some of his disciples to prove that the excommunication was based on a lie, on lies. One of the famous lies is that they testify, two witnesses testify to the Gaon of Vilna that the Hasidim ate on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a day of fast, and they had mixed dancing in synagogue. Well, it turned out that those testimonies were correct, except that Tisha B'Av that year fell on Shabbat. So they really ate on Tisha B'Av on Friday night. And the mixed dancing, they were referring to a father on Simchat Torah, a Hasid, who held his daughter, who was 2 years old. He held her on his hands and they danced. So it was a mixed dancing. There was a girl among the men. However, everybody understands, if you know the facts, according to the way they happened, were being told, there would be no such excommunication. So the Maggid of Mesrich appointed his greatest student, who later became the leader. His name is Rebbe Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, and Rebbe Mendel of Vitebsk was also assigned with the Alter Rebbe, the youngest. He was at the age of 26 at the time, to travel to Vilna to try and convince the Gaon of Vilna to change his mind. However, by the time they arrived there, the Gaon of Vilna already made up his mind, and he refused to accept them. He didn't want to hear from them, so they were unsuccessful. Later on, the Alter Rebbe was assigned to try and dispel all those excommunications and the chasing of the Hasidim in communities where there are Torah scholars. One of those towns, a very famous, so you would come into town and hold a public debate in the synagogue where the scholars would come and point out what is this that the Hasidim do that's wrong, and he would prove that they are wrong. And then he would say to them that he wants to ask them question in the Torah, because they held themselves great scholars, and the Hasidim don't study Torah, they only dance. So he would point out questions and then ask them to respond if they know the answer. And it would take 3 days without a stop. And in either most or all cases, they could not find an answer. And then he would offer the answer, and they would be so moved that they would decide to follow him. They literally left everything, and with their families, they would move with the Alter Rebbe. There is one town called Shkalov. It's in Poland. It was a center of Torah, great scholars, many scholars. And he walked into a synagogue. He couldn't say he's a Hasid because they'll beat him up to death. So he walked in as a stranger and he asked permission to speak in public. And without them knowing the true identity, he started asking them questions, because he said he studied Torah, he studied the Talmud, and he couldn't understand, he couldn't figure out the meaning. And upon us starting to share the questions, they immediately figured that he's not a simple man, he's a great scholar. So they asked him to teach and explain, and he kept teaching them and going back and forth with more questions and answers. After 3 days, they would turn to him and say, where can we study so much? And he would say, in Mesrich. And he would pick himself up and run away before they can catch him. And there are famous rabbis that came out from Shkalov, from that we know that later became rabbis in communities. So the Alter Rebbe was able to, so to say, fight back and push back a little of the challenges that Hasidim had faced. The Gaon of Vilna passed away in the year 1797. Immediately upon his passing, the non-Hasidim renewed their fight against the Hasidim. So there was a lot of chasing, and they directed it against the Alter Rebbe. Although there were 60 disciples, 60 students, and each one took a different section in Poland and Eastern Europe. The Alter Rebbe was assigned White Russia, which included Vilna, and because all the scholars were there, and he was the only one who was able to, so to say, handle them. So they came up, they reported to the Tsar that the Alter Rebbe was supporting the Turkish government, which was at war with Russia, and he's sending funds and he's spying on the Tsar to the Turks to assist them in conquering Russia. He was arrested. He was placed in jail 53 days, at which the Minister of Culture, different ministers, great scholars came to test him because they heard about him. In addition, he was interrogated several times. At the end, they all said that all the blame, all the claim about his behavior is false, and they released him. He was arrested again by false accusation by the non-Hasidim, Jewish people, in 1801. In the 5th day of Hanukkah, he was arrested, and he was, I believe, a little longer, a little shorter. And by that time, when they released him, they issued a declaration that he is a VIP citizen. In the Russian population, Russian family members or ministers enjoyed a VIP status where they cannot be arrested by any policeman. And when they ride the train, they have the privilege of going in their special car. And the Alter Rebbe and his future generations for over 100 years, his children enjoy that privilege. So later on, his sons were arrested also. Grandson was arrested about spreading Judaism, but they could not be arrested by local police, but only from the major town nearby, only then, and they had to have a special permit to arrest him. During the I'm sharing everything with you now because it will be very helpful to understanding when we study. During the Napoleon War in 1812, Napoleon entered Russia, the French army. The Alter Rebbe was very much against the French. He feared that if the French will conquer Russia, they will allow the Jewish population the freedom to behave and act the way they are, and it will cause the assimilation of the Jewish people. So there is a very famous story about prayers on Rosh Hashanah, because there was other major Hasidic teachers who felt the other way. The Alter Rebbe assisted in supplying spies into France, sending Hasidim to become spies, and assisting the Tsar, and later he was rewarded for that. As soon as Napoleon entered Russia, he had to escape and run in deep into Russia. He and his family and all his family members, a bunch of wagons, and they were traveling hundreds of miles in the winter. This was October and November, without stop, so that they should not be caught by Napoleon. Napoleon entered the village where he came from, called Liadi, the moment that they left on the other side of town. And Napoleon ordered a special search for the Alter Rebbe. Also, people who were running away in the roads, but the Tsar escorted, appointed soldiers and horse riders to escort the Alter Rebbe, so he should have a clear path to run away. Unfortunately, he got caught. He got sick on the road, and he passed away on the 24th of Tevet in a small town called Adich. Adich is outside of Poltava. That became a center of prayer. People are coming there all the time. I've been there 5 years ago. He's buried in an old cemetery, Jewish cemetery. He passed away on Saturday night, and the next morning he was buried in that place. The Alter Rebbe had 3 sons and 3 daughters. His oldest son later became the leader of the Chabad community. He printed and published the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Code of Law. He printed the Tanya. He printed a text explaining Zohar, and he printed many, many texts explaining deep concepts in the Zohar. Just a little bit about the Tanya. Before the Tanya was published, it was spread around in small chapters, handwriting copies, because the Rebbe would speak in public and people will write it down. This is a collection of essays, the Rebbe said, and therefore people will write it down and share it with others. for 3 years, so at least 3 years prior, we have manuscripts handwritten of essays that later became the Tanya. The problem was some people purposely made changes to the manuscripts and spread them, so to prove that the Alter Rebbe is not teaching Torah but the opposite, and that forced the Alter Rebbe to agree to publish it properly so that all the mistakes will be removed. In the first time it was published in 1796, as soon as it was published, it became a great success. In the next 3 years, they had to print 40,000 copies. And between 1796 to 1815, which is about 19 years, I believe, they had to have 11 times they had to reprint the Tanya because of the demand. Until 1900, 100 years later, there have been 29 versions, 29 times. But each time, each print house had a different way of publishing it. In 1900, in Vilna, they published it in the way that you see it today. From that moment, in 1900, it's the mother of all printing that ensued afterwards. Today, other than the Bible, it's the most published book in the Jewish world. There are more than 5,000 different places where the Tanya was published, including Sarasota, Florida. Before I arrived here, it was published here in town. So every town, in Venice we published it, in Fort Myers, in every town we print the Tanya to bring the Tanya into the community. The book that we're going to be studying, and I apologize that there is no copies, there were few, but I ordered more. They were supposed to arrive here today. They will arrive tomorrow, so next week. Before you leave, I want everyone wants to purchase a copy to let me know, so because I know I have to order many more. This Tanya, this book, it's only first volume out of 3, and we're going to study the first volume for many years. Is called Lessons in Tanya. There have been many explanations and many teachings of the Tanya. You can study it with many layers. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper. I study Tanya every day for the many years of my life, which I'm not going to share how old I am. I've studied Tanya since I was 4 years old. When I went to yeshiva, you study Tanya with one teacher, going slow over the year, maybe 3-4 chapters. The second year, you go over the same first from the beginning, and it takes much deeper. This time we spend more time on Tanya, so we went 6-7 chapters. The third year, you start from chapter 1, and you go a lot deeper. So it's just like the Talmud. There are many commentaries. There are many lessons, and more can be coming out of it. This book, that the basis that I like is because it was broadcast on the weekly lesson in the radio in New York. There is a Jewish radio station called WEVD, and there was a very famous Rabbi Yosef Weinberg, who passed away about 10 years ago. He was a great orator. He would teach the Tanya for 45 minutes every week. He had a lesson. He had a time to teach Tanya. What's unique about not only that he made it very simple so people can relate to, but he also was lucky that the only one that the Rebbe would look at his notes prior and address and correct and add a lot more to the lesson. So we can say that the Rebbe approved. He would say it in Yiddish. It took 22 years to do the whole Tanya, from 1960 to 1982. In 1982, when they concluded it, they published a large volume, but it called Lessons in Tanya, but it was in Yiddish. Only 10 years later, they published it in Hebrew, and then 10 years later, just 15 years ago, I believe, or 20 years ago, they translated it into English. This version just came out recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, but they corrected the language, they corrected the punctuations, they made it easier to follow. And that's the book we will be studying. Tonight, my goal is just to start with the introduction. Even though it may seem boring, but it is very important. We will get back to it and we'll find how the introduction is very powerful. The Tanya, in short, will address, this is very important, the Tanya addresses a path in life. There is an issue that we all face, and that is, why am I here? Why do I face challenges? What happens to me that is I have no control? How come I cannot be just happy like somebody else? How come I'm not someone else? The Tanya addresses the paths that we all have in life in two ways. One is called the long and short way, and the other is called the short and long way. By the way, I did 2 JLILAS courses, each one 6 lessons that are taking the essence of the Tanya in a very beautiful way. Hopefully, when we come to finishing like 20 or 25 chapters, we can use the JLI, and by then you'll have a much deeper, those of us who have been to those JLI, you will gain so much more, even though it's the same lessons. There have been many, many books published. Rabbi Steinmetz, who is a great, great scholar, published. We have a practical Tanya, just came out 2-3 years ago by Chaim Miller, very, very good book. And there are many more online or in bookstores. But this one, I believe, is the basic, and it will be able to help us move with the flow. And as I said, the rabbi is going to talk about the long and short way. Long and short way meaning is it's a much longer path to discover and practice. However, it's a short way because it will last forever. The short and long way starts at chapter 16 only, takes very few chapters, is a very quick fix. However, you have to restart all over within a short period of time. That's why it's a short but a long way, because as much as it helps, it can help this time for a week, for a month, for 6 months, but then you have to restart all over. And therefore, we start with the long and short way, because once we concentrate and follow, it will help us in a very long path. Any questions so far? Huh? I have always wanted to teach Tanya. Tanya is so much to offer. It is a combination of Talmud, Jewish law, philosophy, and Kabbalah. There is a reason that every Hasid, and not just Chabad, who is serious about discovering Torah, studies Tanya. And as I said, there were people who opposed the Chabad movement, but they do print Tanya without permission, as we'll discover soon. But they do print Tanya and they study Tanya, and there is nothing similar to that. Somebody said publicly, not about a couple of years ago, that in the last 250 years, there have been many new books published, but nothing was new. It's just summarizing, organizing Torah teachings. The Alter Rebbe Tanya is the only book that introduces new ideas that nobody was aware of before. And once they discover them, they see that they are godly. So you have codifier, you have medrash, you have commentary, but it's all based on the existing text. This one is, so to say, freestanding, fresh, new, and there is nothing else similar to that. I also want to say that, in response to the question, every year when I celebrate my birthday, I take upon myself a new good deed, something good. And deep research, I realized that I have to start teaching Tanya. And my birthday is coming up, so this is in honor of my birthday, a new addition to this community. And this Tanya class hopefully will continue on for many years, because I got to tell you, once we finish the first cycle, we will have a big party, and then we will start again, and you will find and discover how much more we missed the first time. So we are going to start, hopefully next week we'll have the book. Wow. I am going to start on page 1. Sefer Lekutei Amarim, a compilation of teachings. The Alter Rebbe was very humble and he did not name the book. So what he called it is compilation of essence of teachings, because it was actually said in public at different occasions or told to individuals in private audience. Later on, when those came together, they published them as one book. It is known as the Tanya because it's the first word of the book. As we'll study when we get to the first chapter, the beginning of the book starts with Tanya. That's why it's named. But the Alter Rebbe himself did not name the book. He didn't feel comfortable calling it with a name.
When you say Tanya, it is taught. Not Tanya.
We'll find out there are 3 different ways. Part 1, entitled Sefer Shel Beinonim, the Book of Intermediates. The Alter Rebbe composed this book for the intermediary people, not the righteous, not the wicked. According to tradition, he actually wrote a book for the righteous and he burnt it because there was nobody who can reach that level. As we'll discover, intermediaries is something that we all should long for, to be somewhere in the middle level of our relationship with God. Compiled from sacred books and from teachers of heavenly saintliness whose souls are in Eden, meaning compiled from holy people who passed away. Based upon the verse, for this thing is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. The Torah tells us that connecting to God and serving God is very near to you, in your mind, in your heart, and in to do. In other words, serving God, serving the purpose I was created is very near. And it's very difficult to understand for many people. I can't afford to keep kosher. My father didn't teach me Torah. I don't speak the language. How is it near to me in my heart, in my head, with my mouth to do? And this is a verse in the Torah. That's not the rabbinic teaching. The Torah tells us that it's near. He wants to open it up and make it easy for us. Explaining clearly how it is exceedingly near in both a lengthy and a short way, with the aid of the Holy One, blessed be He. So as I said to you, the rabbi will actually, by the time we get to study it, we will forget about the past. But at the end, we will see that the rabbi had a very long path that is very effective and a life change. And then he will offer us a short path. But that short is called the long way because you have to get into that practice over and over if you want it to affect you. I am going to read the commentary of the rabbi. This verse on which the Tanya is based speaks of the obligation to fulfill God's commandments, saying that it is very near, that is accessible to every Jew to do so, through 3 channels, which are here alluded to by the 3 phrases, your heart, your mouth, and to do it. These phrases represent respectively the 3 faculties of thought, speech, and action. These are, as it were, the functional organs of the soul. The soul vests itself in them in order to complement its wishes. We have a soul. The soul wants to express itself. It will find 3 channels. The soul vests itself in thought, in speech, and in action. That's how the soul, if I love someone, I will do something for them. I will think about them, and I will say something complimentary to them. This, if I hate someone, it will be expressed through these 3 faculties. So as we will get into the introduction is very, very important, because as we will see, hopefully when you study it in the Tanya, it will be the 2nd or the 3rd time you hear it, so it will resonate. We have the soul expressed, or vests in 3 faculties, thought, speech, and action, and they are enumerated in the verse. When God says it's very near to you to do, to speak, and to keep it in your heart or mind and heart, to serve God, to connect to God. These are the three faculties that allow us to connect to God and live a very good life. In a deeper sense, your heart refers to the emotions experienced in the heart of love in God and awe of Him. When one fulfills the mitzvah out of his love of God, knowing that the only way to unite with Him is by fulfilling His commands, he will do so with an inner vitality and pleasure, just as one does when he fulfills the wishes of a dear friend. The love of God is thus a channel for the performance of the positive mitzvot. On the other hand, one's awe of God will prevent him from acting in violation of His wishes. He who is pervaded by this sense of awe will be most vigilant in avoiding any transgressions of the prohibited mitzvot. What the Rabbi is saying is that God gave us a commandment to love Him. And the best way to practice love and awe of God is by acting according to which God wants us to and refraining from misbehaving. That's how we show reverence. That's how we show respect to God. So if I tell my children, you love me or you respect me, and they say, yeah, I would say, how come you don't listen to me? Because if they do, I know they respect me. And how do I know, how do I express my love or respect for my father and mother? By not angering them, by doing or speaking in a way that makes them feel happy. This is the essence of our relationship with God. And I will use many times, as the Tanya does teach us, the relationship between human beings in this world vis-a-vis God and us. Yes, Herman.
Prohibited mitzvah. What is that?
Eating not kosher, violating Shabbat. There are more prohibitive commandments than positive. There are positive. How many commandments positive? 248. How many prohibitions? 365. By the way, you cannot fulfill all of them. It's a total of 613. They don't apply to one human being, because some of them apply to a male, some of them apply to a female. Some of them apply to someone who gets divorced. Some of them applies to someone who has children. Some of them apply to a Kohen. Some apply to someone who lives in Israel. Some apply to someone who died childless and the wife needs to be taken by the brother. The maximum that a man can fulfill today in this condition of our universe, living in Israel, which many other commandments apply in Israel, is 101. From them, 87 are negative prohibitions.
What?
Paz, 87. Pay is 80. Paz is also a word for gold. Paz. Tovli Torat Picham. The word paz is gold. 87, I believe, are negative prohibitions. But the maximum is 101. What happened to my? You've been saying because your account is signed from another device. I just a minute. I don't understand. Okay. Okay, I am continuing. All right. Herman, did it help you? You asked about the negative prohibitions, right? Okay, let's continue. The verse those declares that acquiring these two emotions of love and awe of God so that they motivate one's observance of the mitzvot is likewise very near to you. This declaration is the basis of the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe now sets out to explain in both a lengthy and a brief way how it is very near. By nature, man's heart desires material things. To develop a love and a desire for godliness is actually to shift one's natural desire from one extreme, worldliness, to another, godliness. Nor is awe of God easily attainable. As the Gemara attests, is awe of God such a small matter? How then does the verse state that it is indeed very near to you? This is something to have awe of God is something very challenging. And yet the Gemara says it's very easy to attain. The Alter Rebbe will explain two ways by which the attainment of love and fear is very near, one lengthy and the other brief. The lengthy route is contemplation. By pondering deeply on the greatness of God and his kindness, one will generate within himself a love and awe of him. The shorter route consists of arousing and bringing to the surface the hidden love of awe of God, inherent in the soul of every Jew. It is short because in this case, he does not create these feelings, but merely reveals them. Did everybody understand what I just read? The rabbi is saying very briefly, there are two ways to connect to God, to live a good, full life and to be happy in every day and all the challenges we face. One is by contemplating about my life. And as the Rebbe will aid us, once you contemplate, you realize how special you are in God's eye, and it will create love for God and awe and respect, not to disobey God who is gifting us with so much. On the other hand, there is a shorter way, and that is there is a secretly hidden love and awe of God exists within our soul. It's there. We don't need to create it. All we have to do is bring it to the surface. Once you bring it to the surface, it guides us and aids us in living a very good life. The problem is that love and awe fades away very quick. So you need to find the tool to bring it back again. That's why it's a very brief, it's a short way, but a long way because you will have to constantly work on it. Now you understand? If you read the text, you'll see that's exactly what the text is. Thus then, this then is the basis of the Tanya. In his modesty, the Alter Rebbe named the book Likutei Amarim, a compilation of teachings, claiming that he did no more than collect teachings from books and teachers. Hasidic tradition understands books as reference to the works of the Maharal and Shalom, and teachers the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid Mesrich. The book is popularly called Tanya for the word for which it begins. Now we're going to go into approbations. The rabbi refused to publish the book without approval by some of his colleagues. So he asked for two colleagues to write down that they agree after reviewing the book that it should be published. There are two approbations. One is Reb Zusha of Anipoli, and the second is Rabbi Yehuda Leva Cohen. I hope to read it now so we can finish with that. Then we can go to the stance of the Rebbe, and then the Rebbe himself giving an introduction, which is very important. Approbations, Rabbi Yosef, I'm reading to, we're going to go to the I'm going to read the approbation by Rabbi Weinberg. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, 6 Lubavitcher Rebbe, cites a tradition concerning the approbations of the tzaddikim, of the righteous men, Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen and Rabbi Zusia of Anipoli. This tradition originates with the Alter Rebbe, with the second Rebbe, the son of the author of Tanya, as follows. For 20 years, the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, revising, adding, and deleting, critically examining every word and even literally every letter, so that in the final manuscripts, there was neither a missing nor a superfluous letter. The rabbi took 20 years to look over that every single letter. There are times where one letter makes a whole change, a whole different understanding. Nor even the seemingly optional letter Vav. Vav means end. It's a very simple addition to the language, and yet an extra Vav makes a whole difference, and the rabbi was very careful. Only then did he permit it to be copied and distributed to the public. As a result of the many copies and copyists, however, a great many errors found their way into the text. It is recorded elsewhere that there were those who intentionally corrupted the text in order to ascribe to the Alter Rebbe's heretical views so that they could later attack him. At that point, the Alter Rebbe sent messengers to the aforementioned tzaddikim, righteous men, to confer with them on the printing of the Tanya and to request their approbations. Both his colleagues expressed their enthusiasm over the book. Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen said, the Tanya is an incense to counter all the spiritual plagues besetting the generations just before the arrival of Mashiach. Rabbi Zusa predicted, with the Tanya, the Jewish people will go out to greet the righteous Mashiach. In other words, the first rabbi said that the generations before Mashiach will be plagued with ailments, with disease that generations prior did not face. And that is called too much knowledge, asking too many questions, and I can't do unless I understand or agree with. And the Tanya comes to address those issues. Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, as we'll read, says that this is the book by which will allow for the Jewish people to exit exile and to greet Mashiach. Both indicated in their approbations that they were writing in the week of Parshat Ki Tavo, when you enter the land. One of their emissaries, Rabbi Moshe Velenker, gave 2 reasons for this. Firstly, by studying the Tanya thoroughly, one enters the land in a spiritual sense, meaning that he makes the essential will and soul of manifest for the word Ratzon, will, is related to Eretz, land. Secondly, the ways of serving God, thought in the Tanya, serve to transmute the curses enumerated in the Parshat Ki Tavo into blessings. Anybody understand what I just read? Not many. Huh? All right, so let me explain. If you look in the approbations, they write the date. Usually when you write a letter, you write a date. They write the date when they gave their approval of to print the book. Both these men date is the week of the reading of Torah for Ki Tavo. Ki Tavo is coming up in 4 weeks. What's so unique about that portion? They did not say, but the man who's the messenger to deliver it to them, he must have been a great scholar. His name is Reb Moshe Velenker. He gives us the reason. He says there are 2 reasons. One is Ki Tavo, meaning the first verse in that portion is when you will enter the land to which God had promised you. Spiritually coming to the land that God had promised us is the arrival of Mashiach, which will bring the world into a very tranquil, peaceful, most desirable lifestyle. So therefore, when they write I am writing the following to approve the printing of the book in the portion of Ki Tavo, meaning that he's giving you a hint that the purpose of this Tanya is to allow us to enter into a tranquil state of mind to be able to live internally in peace and with God in peace. Another explanation is in the book of Ki Tavo. We read 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah every year, and it contains many, many curses. How many curses there are? Anybody can guess? 98. The worst curses you can imagine, that mother will eat the flesh of their own sons, people will put into an oven to bake bread and half of it will be gone. There are many, many curses that God is warning the Jewish people against misobeying God. And therefore, the second rabbi, where he put on the heading, this is on the week of Ki Tavo, it is because he's hinting that the cure or the way to prevent all the curses mentioned in the portion are through the study of Tanya. Did you understand that? Now, if you go back and read it, you'll find it there. Let's continue. We are on page 5. Both tzaddikim, Reb Moshe Velenker went on to explain, similarly indicated their esteem for the Tanya in the way they dated their approbation. Rabbi Yehuda Leiba Cohen wrote the year Tafkuf Nun Vav, which is 1976. 1796, which is an acronym of Tanya, Ktoret, Neshama, Veruach. Tanya is the incense for the spirit and soul, in keeping with his comment quoted above. Reb Zushia wrote the date Shnat Dutenu, the year of our redemption. If you take the word, the year of our redemption, into numbers, it will come to the year 1796, indicating as above that the Jewish people will greet Mashiach with the Tanya. The rabbis say that if you look at the way they put the year, what year? Not just what week, what year? One of them says that the year was Tafkuf Nun Vav, which is an acronym. Tanya is Ktoret for all of us. Ktoret means incense or purifier. And the second ones did not put the year by letters, but put the year in a unusual way, say it's the year of our redemption. The year of our redemption corresponds to the same numerical value of the year that they were writing it, which means that the Tanya will assist us in getting out of exile, personal exile as well as communal exile. Okay, we are over our time. We will stop here, and I hope that you will not, so to say, give up. This is just the introduction, but we have to go through it so that we can get to the first chapter. I'm asking you to keep the copies for next week so I don't have to print again. And hopefully for many of you, there will be the books available next week. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Rabbi. Second.
Thank you.